Now, what is the next step? Well, our next step is how it renders, how we see it. So in this case, we got the sprite renderer, and this is where we're going to go into our materials. Remember that this one looks something like this, right? Again, I have them up here because I just dock the window, so you can move it around and just dock it up here. So I have my Niagara, my Cascade, and then my scene. So if we look at the Cascade one, is how the heck is actually texturing that fire, right? So if I look at the Cascade, for example, and I go to require, you notice that there is a shader in here. Huh, that's the material. That's what the renderer is all about, is how we rendered this sprite. So that's what this guy is doing right here. Okay, you say is mfire sub UV 11 by 11 noise. Okay, so what we're going to do is, I don't want you to create materials right now in the sense of crazy materials or anything like that. I will show you, we will go over materials at some point. Our goal is to actually create the fires. So what we're going to do is we're going to use one of our materials. So go to the material tab here, and what we're going to do is click on that. You're going to notice a couple materials there. And then right here we have a couple that I already made. You may be missing a couple that might not be included in there because they're demo. This is my demo scene. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the one that you currently have, so that way we don't get all confused or anything like that. So in here we have our heat distortion, we have our sparks. I have a basic spark here that I will show you how to create. And then we have the fire sub here and a couple others that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the one that is currently there to make our lives very simple. So in this case, I'm going to use the mfire sub UV. Okay, I'm going to click on that. Okay, just click on it. If you double click on it, what is going to happen is it's going to bring up this setup, and this is your material editor. So if I'm going to dock it up here so we could take a look at it. So this is what that material is. It's a little bit complex right now for what you guys are doing, but this is a node-based structure, the same as Substance Designer, the same as Nuke, the same as Maya. There's no difference. It's just compositing, really. Everything that you're doing is actually compositing. Anytime that you use a node and you use math operations to combine two images together, or two materials together, or two attributes, or two AOVs, and things like that, is all compositing. This is just compositing math structures. So it's very basic. But the things that we are worried about is this guy right here. And this is called a sub-UV texture. And what is a sub-UV texture? So if I double click on that texture right here, it will take me to this. Okay. And that sub-UV texture, this is what you guys probably know it as a texture atlas, as a contact sheet of particles. It's just a sequence in one single image, a fire. Okay, you can make these on Maya, you can make these anywhere that you want, really. You just have to have a sequence of a specific range. In this case, we got 11 particles across, or 11 frames across, and 11 frames from top to bottom. That's what this is. That's it. And it starts with the flame brightly lit, and then it falls off to 0. The flame goes away. So if we were playing this in a sequence, it will be a straight up sequence. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and let's do a very quick setup. If you notice right here, there's two main things that are actually being controlled. The emissive color. And the emissive color, what it does, it gives us that bright, it's like a surface shader in Maya, for example. It's self-illuminated. And based on the brightest spots in that texture, it's going to give us the brightest spots in our render. Okay, and then we have the opacity, and the opacity is just that transparency. Okay, and right here is clamping the transparency 0 to 1, so it doesn't go above that range of 0 to 1 because that introduces mistakes and errors and very bad artifacting. So always, 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 your alphas, we tend to clamp them. Even in Nuke, if you're working in compositing, anywhere that you're using alphas, you want to make sure it's only 0 to 1. It never goes negative. It never goes positive unless we're doing a specific cheat. And that's for other stuff, not dealing with compositing itself. All right, so essentially right here, what we're doing here is just all these nodes, what they're doing is giving you controls for that alpha and that shader. We don't need any of that control. Now, the important parts of the shader, the most important, are this particle color right here. And this actually is what allows us to be able to control through this scale color and through color information It's allow us to take that information from the material and control it that way. If we didn't have this here, we wouldn't be able to control those attributes within the material. Now, these guys get modified, okay, by the texture, and they both get combined together. Forget about all this mumbo jumbo that you see here. That's, again, for controls. The only important thing here is that the particle color here is being combined with the texture and is being combined with the emission, okay? For those two to be able to control what you see in the end. That is this little guy right here, okay? And that's what the texture is doing. Now, we could simplify this, and we will do it later if we have some time, but let's go ahead and move on. So that's what essentially the shader is doing, just creating a light, a emissive, and an opacity. Now, the shader itself is unlit. So if you click on the shader or on the material, I keep saying shader, all right, you will see the material domain is a surface, and it's using an additive blending mode. That means it's going to add one frame over the other, over the other, over the other, right? And it's unlit. That means it's like a surface shader. It's self-illuminated. Also, at the bottom here, everything is set up correctly, but you have more attributes that you can look at of what the material could do. All right. We're not going to touch any of those because the material is extremely complicated at this stage. We're just going to focus on the effect. But that's pretty much something for later. But now you know where the material is and what it's for. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that material to this. So with the material selected, we go back to our engine. We're going to go back to our material. Make sure that you go to your Fire folder and select that M-Fire sub UV 11 by 11 noise. Okay, with that material selected, then we go to, I'm going to close this. No modifications. I'm going to close this. No modifications. We're going to go back to our Niagara system. And in that sprite render on the top here, we're going to say use that material. Okay. And all of a sudden you're going to notice this. It's like, uh-oh, Pedro, this is not working. I'm having issues, right? And here's the calls and the emails and everything is happening. And all of a sudden you're going to realize it's like, oh, wait. How the hell I play the sequence that is inside of there? And that's the key, right? It's thinking that logic. It's using that logic to kind of figure things out, right? So I'm a self-taught artist, so I'm telling you this from my experience, right? I never had a teacher right there telling me, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. Not even for Unreal or anything like that. We didn't have tutorials back in the day. So in this case, what do we do? Well, if we are trying to manipulate the way that the sprite is getting rendered, that means the setting must be in the render itself, right? So in this case, yes, you're completely right. The settings are here. So as we look through it, the technique when we're using this is called sub UV. Remember that in the material, I'm going to double click again to open it. You probably have it open still. You notice that it said sub UV, right? And we're using a sub UV texture. Okay. So what does that mean for me? Well, we have to tell it how many rows and columns that sequence is using. So that sequence was 11 by 11 because the artist of the shader, the author of the shader, was very intelligent enough to actually put 11 by 11, right? Telling you exactly what was the rows and columns of that texture. So in this section right here, it says sub UV. We're going to put 11 by 11. Okay? So now we have this, but it's only playing one single image. But now you're able to see, right, that is now isolating. By us putting that 11 by 11, is isolating only one single square. And remember, I'm explaining all this in this first one because we're going to do the same process over and over, and we don't have to re-explain everything as we go through. So yes, it is a little bit long, but it's going to help you understand what is happening. Now, in this case right here, what we're doing is, okay, now that we got this to read one single area, one single frame of that atlas, that sub UV texture, then now we're able to go to the next step. And what is the next step? Well, we need to play that sequence that is within that atlas. So how do we do that? Well, we use something called a sub UV, and then essentially that sub UV will be an animation. So let's go ahead and look for that. And it has to happen as the particle updates in a frame-to-frame scenario. So in this area where it says particle update, we're going to click the plus sign and we're going to look for sub UV. And what we're doing is the animation of that, so animation. Okay? And all of a sudden you notice it's actually popping. It's like, huh. But it says something right here. Let's use our logic again, right? Well, let's go to the sprite render and see if something is wrong in there. Huh. I have something that is wrong right now. And then over here, but I don't understand what I'm doing. So the first thing that we got to do is first we need to move this sucker, the sub UV animation, up in the stack. I want to make sure that when the particle starts, it plays that sub UV, then everything else happens. It really doesn't matter too much where you put it, but I like to keep it all in order of how I want it to calculate. Okay, so that sub UV animation is happening there. Let's go back now to the sprite render, and we need it to blend. Right now it's just there, so underneath that sub UV section, there is a sub UV blending enabled. So right now it's turned off. Let's turn that on. Okay, and now there is a soft fall off. There's not any more of that pop. Turn it off, and you notice pop, 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 pop from frame to frame. Turn it on, and now you notice that soft fall off. And remember that we made the particle disappear as it was reaching the end of its lifetime. You see how now it's falling off? It's not like a pop. It's not popping out. And the same with the beginning. It's actually very rapidly, but it's falling in, right? Or it's fading in. So now that we have that, the next stage is going back to the sub UV animation, and we need to tell it how many frames we are using. So for that, you could actually use a calculator. And what you're going to do is multiply 11 times 11. That will give you roughly about 121 frames. So let's put a 121 and hit enter. If my math is correct, I don't know. You guys check it with your calculator, and all of a sudden, from that atlas that we were using, boom, we got our flames. Okay, and this is fantastic because as they're moving upwards, they are falling off, so it gives you this nice licks that you see at the top, what we call like the little streaks and stuff like that for the fire, and that's perfect. So that is great there. The next thing that I want to do is I want to look at it in the level. So that's great. Actually, it's inside the realm that we need. That's good. If we need to scale a little bit more, we can. The other thing that we need to do probably is tweak a little bit. You see that it's semi-transparent? We might want to tweak a little bit the color, kind of push it higher, right? But right now, we can either do it in the initialized color, but I want to see my setup. So in this area right here, when we initialize the particle, right here looks great. And that's the problem with black. Everything looks good. So I'm going to turn on the preview again. I'm going to go to the previous scene set and show environment again. You notice that it's semi-transparent. So that's where the problem is, right? But we're doing it on nighttime. Everything at nighttime looks great. But what I want to do is I want to give it a little bit more intensity. I want that thing to pop. I want it to glow. And even on daytime, it wouldn't glow the way that we set up. It would look more like that, but we're creatives, so we're trying to make it look cool. So what I want to do is when the particles initially spawn, we have a color set up in here. So I'm going to go back to my selection here. I'm going to click on initialize particle, and there's a color section here, but that's sitting there, and it's perfectly fine. We can use it, but I want to add one that I could actually see in my stack, so I could read it quickly. So let's go into this plus sign near the particle spawn. And let's look for color. Okay, and I by mistake created a sample. I hit add too fast, right? So let's look for color, and here it is. Let's click on color. By default, the other one was selected. I'm going to move it up the stack. I want that to initialize a particle and colorize it immediately. All right, so what I want to do is I want to take now this color right here that is using that particle color that we had in the material. Remember this sucker right here? All right, the input data, that guy is being connected to the emission, right? It's being combined with all the elements into the emissive color. So that way we now can control it. So what I'm going to do is right here in color, I'm going to crank that guy up. And I'm going to give it a really high value. So either you could type it if you know the value that you want, or we could actually visually see it by clicking on the swatch. So in the swatch, what we're going to do is we're going to crank it up to the orange or the color that we actually want. And from there, we're going to give it a very high intensity. So you notice that right there, the color that I pick is yellow. And fire really, it's not like that. Like realistic fire is actually less saturated in the center. And as it goes, it has different temperatures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to desaturate it a little bit. But I'm going to crank it up here in the value. And we're going to go past 1. In reality, all this lighting goes beyond a value of 1, but the monitor is not capable of displaying that. There's new monitors now, the HDRI monitors and stuff like that in 10-bit, that are able to display that range. But right now, probably the monitor or the screen that you have can't. So any pass value of 1 will look like white, and that's perfectly fine. So what we're going to do is let's give it a value of about 20 to crank it up really high. And now you notice it looks like fire. Now it's like that intense heat. The intense the fire, the more intense the fire, the whiter the flame. So then you have the blues that is super, super hot and stuff like that. So kind of fire is different than what we think when we think about color. Warm is cold and cold is warm. It's completely different. It doesn't make sense right now, but as you study a little bit more in the science part of it, you will realize it. All right, let's hit OK. And that now feels better, much, much better. Now, if I turn off my environment, it has like a little glow already. It's like a post effect. If you notice, you got post processing here, right? And it really is not going to affect your glow because we have it within the scene. But you could do other things in here. I don't recommend dealing with this one right now because you want to see it the way it is. So I'm going to keep it like the way it defaults. Going back to selection. All right, so we are done with our base. Looking back in our scene, that's great. That is intense. We could give it more intensity, but remember, we still have to stack up 3 or 4 more effects for us to get everything kind of feeling the way it should. So now I'm ready to delete this guy right here. So I'm going to go back to my effects folder. I'm going to delete that torch. I don't want to see it anymore. And let's move the torch flame that we created, the Niagara Particle System, NS. That's why we put NS, is a lot easier. And we're going to move it in there. All right, perfect. Now we created our first part of the flame. Now let's go to the next part. So in the next section, what we're going to do is, I missed something here, right? But we're going to go in as we create the other ones. But one of the things that I want is to make sure that as we create the fires, those fires are emitting some sort of light. And we could add it to one of them. We don't have to add it to all of them. But one of the things that we could do is we could have these sprites emit illumination or emit light into the scene. And one of the ways of doing that, if we do it on the first one, when we duplicate this emitter, it will be transferred to the other ones. And then we can shut off whichever one we don't need for performance reasons. But I'm going to go here to the render. I'm going to hit plus. I'm going to say light render. And then the same as our particles that we did in our first example, right? Those sparks, right? And the cool vortex thing that we call it badly power up. My fault, but doesn't matter. It serves its purpose. So the next thing is we go into this light render and crank it up. Let's crank it about, let's say the radius, let's do about 10. The radius controls how far that light travels from that particle, stuff like that. And then now that we have that, it's cool. With the sprites, we could do it a little bit more if we had pure white and things like that, but it really doesn't matter. So now that we have this will create just a very subtle interaction in the scene, right? We don't need much, we just need a little bit. And you could crank these up a little bit higher. And again, this is the radius scale where that light is affecting the environment. So we're going to notice more as we go more. I'm going to put 50 for now. All right, and we're good. Now, at this stage, I want you to compile and save. Make sure that you go to your scene, save your current scene. And I'm saving over my startup map, which is never a good idea. You want to usually go in File and save the level as. So I should have done, instead of that, I should have done start and version 0.1 or 0.2. That way you guys could keep everything in there. Now it's going to ask you need to rebuild your lighting and all this stuff. Don't worry about that. One of the things how you do that is you go to your build here, you go to build lighting only, and then you could also go to building your reflection globes right here. All right, so don't worry about that for now. Okay, so now that we have this in play, the next step will be to continue on with the next part of our emitter.